Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Megan Figueroa.
And I'm Carrie Gillen. And today we're recording with Megan actually here in Phoenix.
We are in the same room because it's your birthday.
It is my birthday.
Yay! There's a cat eating. I'm going to be so distracted.
I know. That's streaky.
In a cute way. I'm amazed by animals nurturing themselves with food and water.
Yeah, there's something very nice and cute about it, for sure.
There is. It's like, you take care of yourself, and I love that.
Yes, okay, so one thing I wanted to talk about, because it was pointed out to me that Bob Garfield sort of apologized about calling out vocal fry, complaining about vocal fry.
Yeah, and I should hear this because I was really mean about him.
Yeah, I think that's okay. I think even when you hear this, you're going to be like,
yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, that's for most male apologies.
So it says, "Old fart," in quotes, responds to great vocal fry outcry of 2013. Great start.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, he's not the one who wrote the headline, I'm going to guess. Usually it's not.
Yeah, that's true.
But the first line is, "I hate women." Or so I am recently informed. This verdict was delivered in the wake of a Slate podcast Mike Buolo and I did, Lexicon Valley episode 24, about the so-called vocal fry. That's what linguists and speech pathologists call the affectation of intentionally creaking one's voice, especially towards the ends of phrases. Linguists used to call it creaky voice.
Yeah, it's a new thing calling it vocal fry.
Yeah, I think speech pathologists have called it that for a long time, but I don't think linguists have.
Yeah.
And B, we don't. It's not an affectation. It's not intentional.
Right. Why do people want to keep saying it's an affectation? Because that's a really big thing.
They really think it's on purpose.
Yeah.
That we do it on purpose to annoy them or something.
Yeah, I can't turn it off.
Right.
I'm not really controlling this at all.
No. In most of our vocal features that we use, we don't control.
Yeah.
Consciously.
Right.
Some we do, but a lot we don't.
Yeah.
And when it comes to sound stuff, a lot of it is unconscious.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. All right, let's go on, Bob.
Anyway, the experts say creaking. I say croaking.
Oh, Bob. I feel like Tina Belcher.
I
know. Now I'm just on the floor and just moaning and groaning. Okay. Does it get better from here?
No.
Okay.
This is mainly an American phenomenon, false.
Yeah.
Which research shows to disproportionately reside among young women and teens, false. Like Valley girls speak in illogical upward inflection. Jen and I went to the mall and we saw this totally cute guy, and Jen's all, "I gotta get to Abercrombie," and I'm like, really? Vocal fry is a gathering epidemic.
Also, teenage girls don't only talk about boys.
Yeah, boys and shopping.
Yeah.
Hello, you do hate women.
Yeah, your heteronormativity, for one thing. And your, capitalistic bullshit.
Yeah, and
Go away.
It's okay to want to shop sometimes, and it's okay if you don't like shopping.
And it's okay to like boys.
It's okay to like boys, or it's okay not to like boys, but, none of these things have to do with teenage girls particularly. It's much bigger than that.
Yeah, but how many examples of people pretending to be a teenage girl are going to be about one of those two things?
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as the Barbie. Math is hard. It's unlike the Spanish flu, only in the narrow sense that it hasn't killed anyone. However, when you hear it enough, you may want to kill yourself.
Okay, that's offensive.
Right?
Yeah, that's okay.
He then says, all affectations are annoying. On Slate's Double X Gabfest, Hannah Rosen mentioned Madonna's late onset English accent, a comparison that works just fine for me. Okay, those are two different things.
Yeah.
Vocal fry is a thing that native speakers use within their own dialect.
Yeah.
And Madonna putting on an English accent, it's different.
Yeah.
And to some extent, putting on or acquiring a second accent is not necessarily fully conscious.
Right.
Because she was living in London, she lived in London for a long time, and so some of it...
And married to someone that had...
Guy Ritchie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear he has an accent, an English accent.
Yes, he does. He is very much English, yes. So...
It's fitting in. You want to be like the people around you.
Right. Speaking of this, what's her name? Meghan Markle has also been accused of putting on an English accent. I think she's been trained to do so.
That makes sense.
Because she's now a member of the monarchy.
Yeah, she can do whatever she wants, so she's beautiful.
Well.
And she has a beagle.
So there's a lot of this, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to skip to the end. There's more. Strictly speaking, someone else's speech patterns are no threat to me. As my critics observe, I have one foot in the grave anyway. Old fart is how Alison Benedict phrased it on the Double X podcast. Also, I don't disdain young women. I have 3 children in that very demographic. They're nice. I like them. And some of my best friends have ovaries. Perhaps what has meant to suspect was that I get mad at Creaky Voice because it makes my flesh crawl. So I guess she was in the ballpark. You have Creek, dude.
Yeah, he definitely does. I did science. And also the like whole I have a mother or I have a black friend or I have why?
No, don't say it. Just never say it.
Yeah.
Oh, mind you, I totally up to the disdain and condescension charges. Those are dead on. I just don't quite get why that's supposed to shame me. You think disdain and condescension are good things?
Right.
Looking down on things you don't like, isn't that what condescension is for? Well, then, we look down on you.
Yes, because you're an asshole.
So anyway.
So whoever brought it up, that there was an apology, thanks for bringing it up. I will use scare quotes around apology.
It's not even close to an apology.
No. And whoever made the headline knew that.
Yes.
Made the headline.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for nothing, Bob.
You really are an old fart. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but come on.
Yeah. And that wasn't even my, objection in the first place.
No, it was...
Don't talk about anyone's speech.
You should definitely not make fun of anyone's speech, but if you're going to, you damn well better make sure you don't have that feature as well. And you do. Mm-hmm. So... slow your roll.
Yeah, on my drive over here, I was listening to a podcast, and I was like, this man has vocal fry, and no one notices it, probably.
Yeah, they almost all do.
Yeah. Another thing that, because I guess we haven't, it's been a couple of weeks, because we had traveling and some cancellations and stuff, so we were a little bit late this week. But we missed out on Merriam-Webster's new words that they added to the dictionary, because as Neil Gaiman just said on Twitter, he said, language is a river, not an ice cube.
I thought that was beautiful.
I know. Of course he said something beautiful.
That's true. Gosh, I mean, he is a real author.
Yeah, he has a way with words, if I were to describe Neil Gaiman. What was really exciting for me is to see that Latinx got in there, which is, again, the gender-neutral way to say Latino or Latina. And I was thinking that it made its way into the dictionary very quickly because the other words that I'm seeing on here feel really old to me. Bougie, which you say that you didn't hear until you came to America.
Yeah, no, it's true. I didn't.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking of the movie Coming to America.
Oh, yeah. It's very different as a white Canadian coming to America. But yeah, no, it's true. But maybe it's because... it sounds funny to Canadian ears because there's, we would pronounce bourgeois closer to the French, and so to say bougie is like, what? Yeah, I guess that is pretty...
We just are saying, screw you, French pronunciation.
Right, which is fine. I mean, the French R is hard.
Yeah.
As it is, which comes up in this episode.
Yes. Oh, I didn't even mean to do that.
No, me neither.
Adorbs, which I'm like, how did that not get in there before? And
well, I would have thought maybe by now it had passed its time, although I guess I see it sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's just going back to the idea that we cut off parts of words, right? So they also added marg for margarita, but
that was definitely still used. I see that way more.
Yeah, and fave for favorite. Yeah. Again, how is that not in there before? That's what I'm thinking, that Latinx really took hold really quickly. And
it's true. Fave especially seems really old.
Cool. Adding new words to dictionaries. Yeah, language is fluid.
It's always fun to see what new ones they put in, and everyone complains because everyone's a curmudgeon.
Yep. So are we.
Yeah, I'm curmudgeonly about some things, but not so much about language.
Yeah. Unless you're being an asshole.
Yeah. Yes. slurs, I'm a little bit more curmudgeonly about.
Yeah.
Once again, just a reminder that we're supported by our listeners through Patreon, and we have 3 new patrons from last month that we want to thank. Liz Essery, James Stacey, and once again, a former guest of ours, Lou Capetta.
Who got so much shit for saying that South Jersey wasn't a thing.
No, Central Jersey.
Oh, Central Jersey. Okay.
He was like, there's North Jersey, there's South Jersey. Central Jersey doesn't exist.
I think that's the most shit that any of our episodes has ever gotten about anything.
Totally.
Which is remarkable.
It's
being
amazing.
like 20-something episodes into a podcast and only getting shit about Central Jersey.
It's true. It's true. Today, our episode, we interview Nathalie Dajko from Tulane University. We talk about varieties of French in Louisiana.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I once again learned a lot of things, and I didn't know it was so dire for French in Louisiana, so it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then she speaks very fast, so if you are one of those people who listens at like 1.5 or 2 times, you might want to slow down.
Yeah.
The main part of this episode.
Yes.
Just a warning.
Yeah.
Today, we have another guest from New Orleans, Dr. Nathalie Dajko from Tulane University. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and a linguist who works on French and English, but we're more interested in the varieties of French of Louisiana. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on.
So I guess like the simplest thing to start off with is, what is French like in Louisiana? Where do we begin?
What is it like? It's like French. Well, actually, it's a good starting point, because there is this misconception from a lot of people that it's going to be incomprehensible to people from France or to people from Quebec, and it's really not. I mean, I came here as a non-French speaker, native French speaker, but I spoke standard French, and I was able to speak that French with people here. In fact, when I tried my first summer here, I went to Plaquemines Parish and a few other places, and when I spoke the way I'd spoken, because I spent the bulk of my time in Plaquemines, and I spoke that way to people over in Terrebonne-Lafourche, they were like, we have no idea, what? Because I was apparently messing it up, because I hadn't spent enough time doing it, so I had to go back to standard, and then they were fine. So my attempts at Louisiana French were terrible, but they can, not to worry, they can understand each other between Plaquemines. It was my bad Plaquemines French that was causing the problem. But no, I mean, it really is French, and there are some differences for sure. But, a few lexical items that cause trouble sometimes, sure. Some words that mean different things in different places, or words that don't exist in one place or another. Chaouis, for example, raccoon, comes from Choctaw. That's not used in France, or in Quebec for that matter, where they say raton laveur. But the bulk of, it's French. It doesn't take much effort to be able to understand each other.
Right. So it's kind of like English. I mean, lexical items that
Sure.
you kind of misinterpret or don't know what you're talking about. Like, I've heard sprinkles are called jimmies in the Northeast, and I'm like, that might confuse me if I heard that. So
Wait, sprinkles are called what?
jimmies?
What kind of sprinkles?
All sprinkles that you put on ice cream, but the black ones in particular were originally called jimmies.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. I've learned something new today. Okay.
Yeah. So.
But yeah, I mean, Louisiana Creole is a little more different structurally than the others, but it's actually close enough that I can understand a good deal. I mean, most of it. Almost. I have a recording of somebody speaking very, very quickly, and that one I have a little more trouble with, but the words are basically the same. And if you gave me a list of words, I wouldn't be able to tell you whether this is Creole or whether it's what in linguistics anyway we call Louisiana Regional French. But structurally, yeah, there are some significant differences that merit calling it something else, right? We call it Louisiana Creole because it's structurally different, but it's nonetheless something that can be understood with a little bit of effort, right? So if I can understand it. But yeah, so where to start? What is it like? Do you want to know how it came to be?
Yeah, like, what's the history of it in the area?
So we got a little hint of it when we talked to Nicole Rosen from the University of Manitoba about Canadian French. Okay. So we have a little bit of the background, but not everyone's going to have heard that episode.
Yeah.
Like I haven't, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Canadian French has a slightly different background than Louisiana French, though they're linked. But yeah, so early in Louisiana's colonial history anyway, right? The French show up. The people who come here initially are going to be speakers of varieties of French that are similar to each other. They're similar to modern standard French, but they're not modern standard French, and they're not even what might have passed for a standard at the time. Not that there was an official standard, right? But we have people who are coming in primarily from Île-de-France, which is the region that Paris is located in. And the people who are coming in are generally not bourgeois types. They tend to be, the only people who want to go to a swamp, a mosquito-infested swamp, right, are people who really, well, a few people who have some money, I'm sure, are coming over, but overwhelmingly you're getting people who see it as an opportunity to get land, for example, which is not possible in France at the time for various reasons. And so you end up, there's a great resistance in France to coming over here. The soldiers who are posted here are not happy, probably because they're wearing wool uniforms in the Louisiana heat.
Yeah.
But, and there are alligators and it's terrifying. And the mosquitoes, a friend of mine I'm from Vancouver, BC. I'm not from here. I've been here about 16 years now. But a friend of mine who is from New Orleans says, and he's in his 60s now, right? So he's like, look, when I was a kid, what changed our lives, really, transformed our lives, was air conditioning and mosquito control. They come around with trucks now, right? And they spray for mosquitoes, and so we have fewer mosquitoes. But I've heard people talk about how in the past the mosquitoes were so thick they couldn't go outside. And so Mom said we had to stay in that day because just, oh my God, the air was black with mosquitoes. And so mosquitoes are a serious problem here. Never mind that everybody's getting yellow fever, and yellow fever is really unfortunate. For most people, yellow fever is just going to be, I feel bad, whatever, like any other kind of flu-like illness. But for a lucky 15%, they go septic, which means they turn yellow, and then they start bleeding from their mouths and their noses. It's really, and the lucky 7% die and the other half want to die, right? Because it's miserable. But so yellow fever, right? All these, it's miserable, right? In the colony, and the food is weird, and et cetera. All these things are not what they're used to, and so they're going back to France at the end of their military tour, and they're like, don't go there. The people in France really are not finding this an appealing solution. So, eventually people do go over. And the people who are coming over are people who are going to be speakers predominantly. We know roughly that they were not upper class, middle class types. And we also know that at the time in France, there are people commenting, specifically Cardinal Richelieu, who says I forget exactly what the quote is, but some really pathetically small percentage of people in France speak French well, by which he means, right, y'all are speaking terribly. So basically we know that, people are coming over, they're from this social class that's unlikely to speak a standard French, or they're from regions that are not the region in which what would become modern standard French was spoken. And so they're speaking something similar, and we hear today there are descendant dialects in those areas that are very similar to what we hear in Louisiana, and presumably to what it was in the past as a result as well. It hasn't been that long either, right? So, but nonetheless, they're bringing over these non-standard dialects that are similar to each other, that are not modern standard, and that is going to be what's spoken early in the colony. Administrators, obviously, and various others who might come from different social classes who are going to be writing. There may be some people speaking what's closer to modern standard as well. But the bulk of the population is not speaking something very standard, and so that's sort of what underlies. Well, it gets complicated after that, because at the same time, right, as of 1719, they're bringing in Africans who are going to have to learn French, and this is the French that they're going to learn, right, because that's what's around them. And so they're going to take this French and they're going to transform it structurally to become Louisiana Creole. And so they are the creators of this other variety, Louisiana Creole, the base of which is this non-standard French. And so this is what's going on at the end of the French period, right? We have these two groups. We have enslaved people, we have free people, most of whom are going to be European, but nonetheless, there are going to be others as well. But you have these two types of French spoken, right? You have this Creole and you have this non-standard other French that's a mix of all these non-standard similar dialects. And so into this mix during the Spanish period are going to come Acadians from Canada, and the early settlers as well. I mean, the very early settlers in New Orleans included some Canadians as well, coming down from Quebec and so on. So they're part of the mix, right? So non-standard French from Canada, non-standard French from France. All of these people are mixing here, all these non-standard Frenches that have a lot of similarities. But into this mix, now we get the Acadians. During the Spanish period, you get a few Spanish speakers as well in the form of the Isleños. Spanish they have the same problem recruiting people that the French had, right?
Yeah, sure.
In the middle of all this, incidentally, there were a few German speakers who settled up on what's now the German coast, about 30 miles from the city, who were basically lured over here with false promises of mountains and oh, it was bad. There was a propaganda campaign, so they came over. There are a couple of hundred of them living upriver. They eventually are going to start speaking French as well because French is hegemonic, right? It's dominant in the area. So in any case, the Acadians are going to come down starting in 1764. So for about 20 years, 1764 to 1785-ish, we see the bulk of Acadian immigration. And that's going to be about 3,000 people coming in. About 1,500 in the 1760s, and the other half in the mid-1780s. During that period, though, the population of Louisiana is going to increase. So at the end of the French period, right, roughly 1760, you get there's about 10,000 people here, free and enslaved, and into that mix we get about 1,500 Acadians, and they're going to settle to the west around Lafayette. There's a couple sent up to Natchez. They don't like it there. A few sent up to Natchez. They come back down to join their friends and relatives elsewhere. The second wave of Acadians are going to come in when the population has basically quadrupled, right? By now the population's closer to 40,000, and that's not just natural. These are Catholics, sure, but 10,000 people in the space of 20 years are not going to make 40,000 people that easily. So there's some other immigration too. But nonetheless, the population is predominantly Francophone, predominantly these other non-standard Frenches. But these Acadians are going to speak something very similar. They come from France can basically be split into north-south, much like the American north-south, right? We have a dialect region where we have southern dialects, we have northern dialects. Same thing in France. You have a line that basically cuts France in half where you have southern dialects and northern dialects. And the Acadians came initially from France to Acadia, which is now Nova Scotia, from an area where they spoke northern dialects. And it's a northern dialect that becomes modern standard French as well. In any case, they come down here. They're going to settle out west at first. The second group is going to come in. They're going to be around Thibodaux, just northish of Thibodaux. And they sort of trickle down the bayou a little bit, but that's primarily where your Acadians are. And the two groups are kind of at odds for a little while. After the Civil War, there's this entire social collapse. And that's when groups start mixing. And so between the arrival of that second group of Acadians and the Civil War, right, the Americans take over, English comes in. A lot of English comes in the form of Americans coming in from Virginia, from the Carolinas. We also have, in the city, we have a large number of Germans. We have Irish who are also speaking English.
Wait, what was English doing before then, in the area before the Civil War?
It had a minimal presence.
Okay.
I mean, there was this whole, French, the reason that France, in fact, cedes Louisiana to the Spanish is because they're losing the 7 Years' War, which is called the French and Indian War here. And so they don't want the British to get this territory, so they secretly give it to the Spanish, right? So there's this resistance. In fact, a lot of the settlement patterns, right? We're going to put these Acadians, the Spanish are now going to put Acadians in strategic places to try and block the British from moving, right? So, anyway. So I mean, I'm sure there are some English speakers, but there's this influx of English that comes in with the Americans in 1803, and especially with statehood in 1812. Irish as well is going to be part of Irish English, that is going to be part of the English mix as well, especially in the city. A lot of Germans come in. Also coming in during the early 19th century are people coming in from France who are refugees from Napoleon's war, who were Napoleonic supporters, right? Bonapartists who are going to come in. They're also a little more bourgeois. They speak basically, what passes for modern standard French. A few lexical differences, a little bit different, but it's really not that different. That's going to come into the mix here too. At the same time, you have people in Louisiana who have maintained contact with France, right? So the plantation society, people with a lot of money are going to send their kids to France to go to school. There are also schools set up in New Orleans that are run by people from France who speak standard French, basically modern standard French. And so those who have the money to go to these fancy schools, whether it's here or whether it's in France, are learning modern standard French, and they're bringing that with them to Louisiana. And so ultimately what we have in Louisiana are, in the early period, a non-standard French that obviously is not documented because back in the day there weren't any recordings made, and nobody was really caring to write that down. And so we really don't we can only infer from the way people speak today, from things that are said about the way people speak, this kind of thing about the French, from the places they're from and how people there speak today, right, and so on. So we have a non-standard French that properly would be called colonial French. We have Acadian French that's part of the mix, and we have Louisiana Creole. And then coming into this is this standard French. And what happens is, following the Civil War, there's this collapse of society. And so this very standard French is more accurately termed plantation society French. And there are going to be people who maintain a sort of standard French, especially in places like New Orleans, and especially in places where the wealthy hung out, like Grand Isle. And so you find a uvular R, the that everybody has trouble with when they're learning French. Except me, I have trouble with the other R, the Spanish, but I did it. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, there it is.
It was kind of amazing. Now I cannot do it in the middle of a word. It's just not possible. But in isolation, I sometimes get it. But okay. But there's a collapse of society. And so people start intermarrying at really high rates. And so there's going to be influence from all these different Frenches, right? In especially the French that is spoken by people in the countryside. They're going to start mixing Acadians with non-Acadians of various types. And so what we now call Cajun French, what is most often called Cajun French by its speakers, is a mix of these non-standard dialects of Acadian French, of, to some degree at least, the plantation society French. And that becomes what most people call Cajun French. In linguistics, it's kind of complicated because people will often call their language by the name they call themselves. So if they call themselves Creole, they call their language Creole. If they call themselves Cajun, they call their language Cajun. Generally speaking, most speakers of Creole are going to be people of mixed race, or I don't want to say there's nobody who's exclusively anything, right? So, but people who would otherwise also call themselves Black, or who would say I'm of mixed ancestry, tend to call themselves Creole and call their language Creole. And people who identify as white/Cajun tend to call themselves Cajun, tend to call their language Cajun. That said, there are people who call themselves Cajun, but would speak what linguistically we would say is a Creole, is Louisiana Creole. And there are people who call themselves Creole who speak what linguistically we would otherwise call Cajun French. And because of that, right, that problem of labels, and so that's why in linguistics we call it Louisiana Regional French rather than Cajun French, which implies, the name Cajun implies a direct relationship exclusively to Acadia. Which, right, people hear this word Cajun, they say Acadian, and that's where it comes from, right? Cajun is Acadian, Acadien, right? There's a process in Acadian French, and here where you pronounce dieu, like in English, would you becomes would you. So Acadien becomes Acadien, becomes Cajun. And so...
Whoa, you blew my mind. Okay. No idea where Cajun came from. Okay.
Well,
cool.
A lot of people hear this and they recognize this link and they say, oh, well, it's just Acadian French, and it doesn't matter how many times I give this lecture. And I'm not the only one giving it. I still hear then, oh, Cajun is Acadian. No, that's part of it. Yes, absolutely, it's part of it. But it's not the only thing. And I have a friend who says, there are Acadians in Canada, there are Acadians in Maine, but Cajun only happened one time. And it's because Cajun is this thing that happens here in Louisiana, right? It's a mix of all these other things. For that matter, Creole is often used interchangeably with Cajun by people who are not from here. Right. And so I get questions about, can you tell me about the Cajun Creole? And I'm like, well, I don't even know what you mean by that. Or they exchange the terms. Linguistically, structurally, there are some differences between Louisiana Creole and Louisiana Regional French, and from Standard French for that matter. There are definitely differences between the three. Plantation Society French, if it's still spoken, it's spoken by like 3 people. I don't know where they are.
Yeah.
Periodically, you hear rumors there's someone in New Orleans who speaks French, but it's been a good decade since anybody. I did interview a woman who spoke French growing up, but she'd forgotten it by the time I interviewed her, and she's since died. You're not getting a lot of people speaking a very standard French, that plantation society French, in Louisiana anymore. There are definitely regions that have been influenced by it, like Grand Isle, where you get that uvular R. In Louisiana today, there are really 2 varieties that are still spoken, and it's primarily by older people. You have Louisiana Regional French, which some people prefer just to call Louisiana French. For that matter, there are indigenous people, right, who also speak this language. Is another reason we give it that term instead of Cajun, right, because Cajun implies this ethnic group, and it's the linguistic lines aren't drawn that easily. And we have people speaking Louisiana Creole, and Creole's in further decline than Louisiana Regional French, but they're both endangered. When I was doing my field work 11 years ago, oh my God, okay, so 10 and 11 years ago, there were some kids who were learning it, but very, very few. It's really, really rare. But that said, there's a lot of promise. It's not dead yet. It's still got a chance. There is hope. There are people who are dedicated around Lafayette especially. There's a group of young people who are very much dedicated to bringing the language back. You have people all over the state who hold these tables, table française, where they get together just to talk French.
Oh, how fun.
We're just going to hang out and speak French. And so it takes a community to do it, right? Somebody once asked when I gave a presentation, when I first got here, I took this class in Louisiana French. We went out, we interviewed people, and then we gave a presentation, and some of the people we'd interviewed came to the presentation, and they said, well, what are you going to do to save French? And someone in the back who was a linguistics professor, if I may, they can't do it by the way, they can do something. They can maybe prepare pedagogical materials for your schools and so on, but what it really takes is a community of people who speak it all the time. Because my son is 4, we were in France for a year, and it took him about 2 weeks once we got back to the States for him to realize that, oh, no one here speaks French, and now he refuses. If we speak French, he yells at us.
Yeah.
And kids will refuse, right? They know what's going on around them, so you really have to make it something they want to do, and people have to speak it around them. Otherwise, it just becomes this thing you do in school, but whatever. And which is a way of saving it. And I'm not saying the schools aren't part of it.
Why is it in decline? Is it because, are there pejorative or negative views of these two?
Oh, sure.
So is that why you think it's in decline, or what is...
Well, it's in decline because English comes in, the Americans come in, and that's where the money is, right? Industry is now done in English, everything is done in English, and there's already a move to go toward English by at least the middle classes who speak French in the mid-19th century. It's a long process of decline. It really picks up speed, especially in rural areas, after World War II. It's a two-tiered process, right, where around World War I, there's already this sort of Americanization thing going on, anti-German sentiment, right, et cetera, et cetera. We're all going to be Americans, we're all going to speak English. And there's a push to speak English. There's also the Louisiana Constitution. A line is put in there. I mean, the Constitution's actually gone back and forth about schooling in French over time. But in 1921, they add a line that says, English will be the language of instruction in the schools. And that's not verbatim, but that's basically,
yeah.
I mean, it's literally one line, and that's all it says, is that you're going to speak English in the schools of instruction. Some people take that a little too far. I hear varied reports of, I spoke English. They had to write lines that said, I will not speak French on the school grounds, i.e. at all. I had a guy tell me his father marched over to the school and said, look, it says right here that he has to be taught in English, but it says nothing about what he can speak on the school grounds. You leave him alone, right? So clearly there were teachers who took this much further than even the Constitution suggested they should. In other places, it was, I get a lot of, oh no, my teachers were very nice. It really depends on where you went, but it's clear that overwhelmingly, you don't even need to punish somebody, right? You get stories of kids having to kneel on raw rice or raw corn because they spoke in French and so on, or having their fingers wrapped with a ruler, which really hurts.
Yeah. No, this is like exactly what happened with Spanish in the Southwest.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it happens in a lot of places, right? But you don't even need to punish people for speaking their language to make them feel bad about it, right? You have people tell me that this priest came in and he told us that it wasn't really French we were speaking, that we were just making things up. And I'm like, and you believed him, right? But what, did he speak French? No. He was an English speaker and he just made these assumptions, but he was a person in authority and they were made fun of for speaking French. It becomes associated, especially when the upper classes abandon it. Now it's, the language of poverty, the language of rural, et cetera, negative things in general, right? So it's there are a lot of factors that combine. You don't need to punish people to make them feel bad about their language, right? You can just tell them it's broken. And so they tell me, but we speak a broken French. It's not the real French. And so depending on where we go, in many places people are very proud and they want to be interviewed. And in fact, it was they who said to me, what are you going to do with these interviews? Can you put them in the library so that, we have access to them? And I was like, well, that's perfect, right? They were the ones who requested that. But there are definitely places I've been where people have said, we speak French, but I don't like it.
But I wonder if those people that are proud now, if they went through a period where they were very embarrassed. Do they mention that, or?
Some of them, yes. Some of them very clearly. Their children, for example, they didn't teach them French because they didn't want them to be punished or to be shamed, even like they had been. But they've regretted it over time. Especially, in the mid 60s, going into the 70s, there's a big push in America to do the reverse, right? I mean, a lot of the French I sort of broke off with the story, right? But in the 1920s, you have a generation of kids who are going to school, though not everybody is actually going to school. As it turns out, I have people going, oh yeah, I went to one day of the first grade and then I left. But overwhelmingly, people are going to school and they're going in English, and there's motivation to speak English economically as well, right? Jobs are in English. And this is especially true after World War II. And that's where you see just a precipitous decline. But it's the first generation that has the option to speak to their kids in French, right? They went to school and they went home and their parents didn't speak English. This generation went to school in English and they continue to speak French at home, but now they have the choice. They have these kids and they're saying, what are we going to do? We can speak English, so let's do that. And French becomes a language they use when they want to keep secrets from their kids, which works to varying degrees. There are a lot of people who understand French but don't speak it as a result of this. But yeah, so you see this precipitous decline right after the war, and especially there's a pro-America, but also there's this economic boom, right? We're all going to speak English, but there's an economic boom that promotes it too. I mean, what do you want? What's more important to you, speaking French or getting electricity down this bayou, right? So clearly, who doesn't want electricity, right? And who doesn't want to have a job? Nobody wants to live in destitution, right? And so English is the language of all the access to security, to economic security. And so the motivation to switch to English is really strong, even without punishment, shaming, etc., while that is occurring simultaneously. So yeah, in the 60s and 70s, there's definitely across America a reclamation of ethnic identity. Let's all celebrate our background, etc. And it's especially, I think, during those periods then, which come a little later to some places than others, but you have people now saying, I regret not teaching my kids, because they don't have the option to speak French to their kids now unless they make some Herculean effort to learn it and then speak it. I mean, I don't speak French to my son, right? Because I speak it fluently. I speak 2 dialects at least, right? My husband speaks like 3 dialects of French. He speaks French well enough to pass for French when we're in France, and yet we don't speak it to our son because it's not our native language, because it would be strange to us, because we speak to each other in English. And if we can't do it, right, somebody who already doesn't speak French is going to have to first go learn French. This is going to be an enormous effort, right? So, and there's a lot of misconception too. There are people who are native French speakers who say, oh, it's okay. My grandson, as soon as he learns English, I'm going to teach him French, because they've somehow been sold a line that suggests that a child won't be able to learn 2 languages simultaneously, right? That one is going to mess up the other, and that's going to be bad, when in fact the reverse is true. Yes, it's true. There's a slight delay. Yep. In acquiring language when you're bilingual, but you catch up and then you do much better. In general, cognitively in general, there's a benefit to speaking 2 languages. And
yeah, monolingual kids are actually being underused. Brains are being underused. Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into this, right? Why are people not speaking French? I mean, and there are still people who are still ashamed. I mean, I've been in places like Thibodeau. I've met people, for whatever reason, right? The urban areas tend to be far more ashamed of French than the rural areas. And so that's where I've met people who have said things like, yeah, I speak it, but I really don't like the fact that I speak it. Or, this is bad French. There's a lot of that going around. People will tell me, yeah, because I'm looking for people to interview, and I'm, hey, do you speak French? Yeah, but we speak that broken French. And I'm like, no, that's what we need. That's what we're interested in. Like, really? And then they're surprised, but okay. And then they get excited about it, but because they do love their language and they know how outsiders see it sometimes. But that said, there's also been an increase in awareness of its value. You have tourism, when the French people are coming literally to hear you talk, right? And not to make fun of you. It's a good thing when this is actually now financially viable. Like, this is a thing that's going to get me, I can take tours, people on tours, and my speaking French is now an advantage. That matters too, right? So increasingly, I think there's a lot of awareness that French is not bad. Whether it's come too late, I hope not. There is still a chance, but it would take, effort. That said, French has also had a lot of influence on Louisiana English. So
it just makes me so sad to think that some people think that they don't have anything to offer. Like their language, they don't have any. My language is not something that you.
It's want. Very common. It's very common.
It's so common. It's everywhere.
It's common of non-standard dialects in English. It's common of it. It's the same relationship, for that matter, that you get with any non-standard dialect that people know. People tend to know when they don't speak standard, right? And they know what people think and what the associations are. And however unfair, it's entirely unfair. None of these are, there's nothing about any dialect, about any language that indicates stupidity, for example, laziness. These are the things that are usually associated with non-standards and so on. There's nothing about that language that actually is stupid or lazy or etc. But there are all these associations, social associations, right, that because the people have been accused of these things, they're not, but they've been accused of it, therefore their language is also, right, indicative of this, somehow inherent to it. But it's a problem across the board that consistently I encounter.
Yeah.
When you ask people if they know French and they say, oh, I know the broken kind, is it speakers of both dialects that will say that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so just across the board, they think they speak broken French.
Totally.
Okay.
We speak broken French, or we don't speak the good French of the de l'autre bord, from the other side of the ocean, right? We're like, no, we don't want that French, right? And so sometimes there's even in Terrebonne-Lafouche, I came across, very rarely, but nonetheless, people who felt Lafayette was better than they were because, for example, in Terrebonne-Lafouche, they have a single pronoun for who and what. So it's qui, regardless of whether it's who or what. So what do you have in your hand is qu'est-ce que tu as dans ta main? Okay, which of course that construction, qu'est-ce que tu as, is different than you would in standard French. But out west it would be quoi tu as dans ta main, or qu'est-ce que tu as, depending on it. In any case, same thing. And so they're like, so we went to this meeting once. My assistant and I were sitting there, and the guys are telling us, well, out in Lafayette, they have two pronouns. We just have this one. And so my friend says, oh, but they use quoi as a crutch. And I was like, okay. So we're joking, right? And I'm like, well, no, it's all right, because y'all are streamlined, right? You got it down. But they did not want to hear our opinions on this. Like, we're trying to convince them that it's really okay, but they're like, no, it's not. And they were meeting literally to every month they would meet, and they would go to the dictionary in between, right? They would all look up words, and they would say, here's a word, we don't have it. We should have it, right? Our language is deficient in some way because we don't have this word. Sometimes, the classic was, we don't have this word. It's a kind of tree, but we don't have those kind of trees here. I'm like, it's probably why I don't have the word.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a guess, but they were very insecure about their French, and it was really a shame.
Yeah. So is the only good French, quote unquote good French, the one in France?
Oh no, not at all.
Them?
No.
Oh, okay.
And one of the questions we often ask is, which French do you think French should be taught in the schools? And universally it's yes. And unless you go to Thibodeau, but okay. Increasingly in Thibodeau, and I don't mean to disparage Thibodeau. There are plenty of people in Thibodeau who do love French, but that's where I've encountered negative attitudes, right? Though not necessarily, often it's the English-speaking population that's extremely negative toward French there. Which French do you think you should be taught in the school? And sometimes, very often people say it doesn't matter. Any French is good and whatever, right? Because they know that they can understand standard and it's a good starting point and whatever. And so it doesn't matter, it's French and others, but very often you get people saying, no, it should be our French. Because that's the French that identifies them, right? This is the French they identify with, that reflects their own background, that reflects the place they live, and so on. And so that's the French they want in the schools. So they clearly are very, when people are telling me, please put this in the library and please record, it's I had a student contact me once from another university saying, my professor said I should call you, and ask you for a recording. I wanted to come down there and do some recordings, but he said I didn't have the time to build up the necessary trust. And I'm like, you mean the 10 seconds between my saying hello and when I say, and they're going, you press that button, right? Because they want they hear somebody is interested, that somebody wants to document this thing that is very important to them. And it's their identity, right? It's your language is the way you express yourself. It's not just, this is my cultural background, but this is me. This is how I express, this is how I tell a joke, and that's how you see my sense of humor, and this is how my personality is coming across, and everything is tied up in this language. And so to lose it is very personal. And so somebody comes in saying, hey, I want to document, and they're like, yes, press that button. No, the ease with which one can find people to interview is reflective of the fact that people really do care about their language. They love their language. They're often very proud of their language, especially the ones who in the Second World War, for example, were sent to Europe and discovered, they knew what they always knew, but that they would have other guys in their unit telling them, you don't speak French, yours is like Greek to them, you're not going to be able to talk to people. And then they get there and sure enough they can, and they're the translator, right? And suddenly they're promoted to, because now they can talk to all these people. There was a great story, I still have to put it up at my website, that one guy gave us. His commander kept telling him his French was terrible. It wasn't really French, whatever. But so then they get to France, and it turns out, he does speak French. So the commander is going, hey, get me a date with the waitress here, right? So, all right. So the guy says, he goes, yeah. So I told him, all right, yeah, she's going to meet you, at 7:00, whatever. But I met her at 6 instead. And so he made a date himself. It was great.
I love it.
But no, especially when you've had that validating experience of going to France and having all these guys say, yeah, you don't speak French, and then you get there and, oh, what was that? What was that you said, right? So, oh, you need me to translate for you, right? Okay.
Right.
But
there's a lot of people like me and our listeners who will listen to this and just feel like they want to do something. Is there anything that we can do besides just being aware of the situation that's happening and like appreciate, like, I don't know, like, is there a takeaway from this where we could help in any way? Or
I mean, from outside the situation, it's hard to say. I mean, the first thing people can do is recognize, right, that any non-standard dialect, whether it's of French or of anything else, is valuable and is rule governed and is just as logical and et cetera as any other. I mean, even logically, right? How could you communicate with each other if you weren't following the same system of rules, right? Like, I'm just going to throw out random words at you and you're going to say, oh, of course. That doesn't even make sense, right? But to recognize that the way people speak is not a corruption of the standard is important, and it's something I always wish that people who have to go into education would have to take the class on sociolinguistics, because I've had so many people write in the comments, I thought that, you know, XYZ was just bad English until I took this class. And if you're going into potentially into a classroom where kids are going to speak non-standard Englishes, you should understand where those come from, how they develop, that they're not, you know, bad attempts at the standard.
Because kids will like take anything you say and just like internalize it.
Right. Oh no, kids, you don't even need to say it. They look around and they think everything they see is normal, and that it exists this way because it is good and it should be. And to explain to kids that some things are because of prejudice, and what prejudice even is, right, to a small child. But they know this really early, as I'm learning with a small child. I mean, I read about it, but it doesn't really, sure. And then it happens to you and you're like, oh, okay. My son is deeply upset because his teacher keeps talking about the washroom instead of the bathroom. She says the washroom, it's the bathroom. And this is clearly, I've been remiss because it's Canadianism and I obviously haven't been using it enough, but okay. But he's 3 and or 4 now, and it bugs him that she uses this word that's wrong, obviously, because no one else uses it. He knows no one else uses it except her, but okay. But I mean, I'm sure Codafil would like some money. There's always, I'm sure they take donations. But Codafil is the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana, and they work to promote French by bringing in teachers, by training Louisianans to become teachers, which is a better option, right, than just bringing people in from elsewhere. But to promote French economically, etc. What can you do as an outsider? That's a good question.
Well, I always think that one of the things you can do is tell, if you hear anybody say something disparaging, you can say, no.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Don't be an asshole.
Right? You're wrong. Right?
I mean, obviously you have to like modulate for the person, because some people you can be more mean to because they're, you know, your sibling or something. but like try to just push back.
It can be really hard to convince people that
it is really hard,
that any non-standard dialect is good in the first place and not bad, and that's not speaking English. Oh, the classic, of course, is that French is useless because today everybody should be learning Spanish or even Arabic or Chinese, and I'm not saying those aren't useful languages, they are. But French also is very important. It's spoken by a large percentage of the globe. It's still a diplomatic language in many places. There are many economic benefits to speaking French. I mean, I've traveled and had to use French when I traveled because people didn't speak English, which is unusual, but it happens. Every now and again that you go somewhere and French becomes the lingua franca. It's still a very important world language, and people forget that.
Mm-hmm. And you can't discount the personal connection to
and that
language.
Too, especially down here, right? So. But to actually save Louisiana French, that is something that the community itself, right, it's just going to take.
Yeah.
I can make as many teaching manuals and I'll do what I can, and I do my part by stressing that it really is French and not, you know, something else. But that said, that's a whole complicated issue too. There are people who very much in some places would prefer that their language be acknowledged as different and separate. That is not the case in Louisiana. So in Louisiana, it is French. And just to remind people that it is French, and here's how. And the fact that I can walk in speaking standard French and have no problems is indicative of this, right? So, or very few problems. Every now and again, a word is really not. There are a few structures that are different, right? So to be doing something in France, well, okay, in standard French, je mange is either I eat or I am eating. In Louisiana, if you want to say I am eating obligatorily, you have ways of distinguishing it, of specifying in France that you are currently eating, specifically, je suis en train de manger.
Right.
But in Louisiana, you obligatorily have to say, je suis après manger. I am after eating, quite literally.
Right.
And so there's a difference. If you say je mange, it does not mean it's not either or. It's habitually I eat. I eat every Tuesday, right? Versus je suis après manger or j'après manger, very often the être is left out. But in any case, though that will be a structural difference between standard French and Louisiana French, but it's not a big thing, right?
Right.
It's really easy to catch on to. In 2 minutes, you've got it, and there you go.
The only reason standard French is because of power.
Exactly.
Right?
Precisely.
So, yeah.
Ironically, the revolution that spread this language of the bourgeoisie. Okay, we're all going to be equals by speaking. We're all going to be equals by speaking the language of the elites. Let's do it. But yeah, liberty, equality. Okay, but no, it's actually interesting because somebody a few years ago put a video on YouTube of clips of French from Louisiana and from France, and I'm not sure. I had the high score along with a bunch of Louisianans. We were able to, but I was guessing for half of them. It was, in all honesty, luck in some cases. I had no idea whether these people were from France or from Louisiana. They were rural speakers from places like Normandy or Poitou or various parts of rural France. And in some cases, I guess, I'm not even sure what led me to guess right, but there it was. But it was really hard to do, right? Because the similarity between Louisiana French and non-standard Frenches in France is very, very high.
That's interesting.
If you live in Louisiana, the best thing you can do is support other people's desire to revive their language, right? I know there's a fundraiser going on around here sometime soon. I'd have to look it up when it is to support French immersion education on the North Shore. There's some issues there, but
yeah, send that to us and we can post it.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look it up.
But okay, so one last thing before we go. So very, very long, towards the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned that there's a French influence on the English in Louisiana. Can you give us some examples?
Easily. Okay. Especially in the countryside, you get, the classic actually is to use the word mais, meaning but, to preface a statement. Mais, whatever. May have you seen the thing? May did you go to the store? May yeah, I went. May yeah. Especially may yeah, may no. But that use of mais has increasingly just been used sort of to indicate I am South Louisianan, right? This is my identity. But you get a number of words that are borrowed in, boudet, to pout, envy, to have an envy for something, to want something, right? I'm trying to think of another example. Parrain, marin, parrain, marin, right? However they're pronounced in English, I always mess it up because I do speak French. But godmother and godfather, but especially godfather has stuck, parrain has stuck around in English, though increasingly it's disappearing. When I did a survey on this a few years ago, it was disappearing in the city. But banquet in the city was used until recently for the sidewalk. We have expressions like make groceries, which comes from French faire les courses. It's a calque of French expressions. We have a number of expressions like that. If you go to the countryside especially, you hear phonologically the English has been influenced by French. So it was a friend of mine a few years ago who was studying specifically Boudreaux and Thibodeau jokes in Cajun English. And so she was interviewing these guys and she had it on tape and she foolishly gave me the recording and now I've lost it. But it was great, right? Because she's talking, and at some point they start making fun of her. And the way she says okay, they're like, okay, right? And they're doing these imitations. She's like, wait, are you making fun of me? And she's like, what? How am I supposed to say it? And they were like, okay, right? So without the off glide, that's all wrong, right? Like, no. So yeah, there's definitely vowels. My field assistant was like, it's hilarious when you try to speak, I have an easy time speaking Cajun French because all the sounds are the same, right? We have those sounds in English here and you don't. And then he would try to teach me to quote unquote talk flat. And he would laugh even harder when I got it right, because coming from me, for some reason, it was extremely funny. But, right, because it's non-standard, right? And here I am, and he's like, no, this is really good. We're going to get you to do it again so we can laugh even harder. But a lot of those sounds, right, generally in many English dialects, but in standard English dialects, we tend to pronounce O, E, with these little, it's kind of messy at the end. But French is very O, E, right? And Spanish does this as well. And that is transferred into A. It's not A, it's A. And that transfers into English in Louisiana as well. So we have words, we have expressions, but we even have sounds, right, that have transferred in. It's like learning French with an accent, right? But then that accent stays. The next generation learns that accented French, and those are the sounds that become the sounds of their English. And so in that way, French has left an enormous mark, but it's also left an enormous mark psychologically, right? People think about French, they associate French with Louisiana, and they use it to assert Louisiana identity. And so in New Orleans, where if you know a French speaker, please call me. We'd like to document them. But like it's been a decade at least since any one of us who studies it has been able to track anyone down. I'm sure they're out there, but I mean there are some semi-speakers for sure. Fluent speakers, I don't know. But so in the city, we're 90% plus at the last two censuses, for that matter, over 90% of the population has said we only speak English. But French, they'll still, right? And they still talk about being French and speaking French and how we use French here. And so you end up with EAUX, right, from the spelling of Boudreaux, Thibodeau, et cetera, now being used to represent any O sound. Mm-hmm. Go Saints has an EAUX, although that would be Jo. So the French come here and they're like, what's Jo?
Yeah.
So Taco Loco? It's Tasso Loso, right? Whatever. And so, hey, have you noticed this? And my friend is like, oh yeah, go tell them that. They'll appreciate that, right? So the last thing they want to hear is you telling them they spelled it wrong. But there was a snow day, right? And I got this text saying it was snowing, SNEAUX, and I was like, all right, snow, got it. But that EAUX is used all over the place, but it's a reference to French, right? It's a direct like French. And so French still plays a very big role in the imagination, in people's identity, knowing that historically it was French, knowing that their ancestors spoke French, even if they don't speak it themselves, though many people still do. But in that way, it lives on sort of beyond its lifespan. But we'll see what happens. There's still a chance it could come back in some places anyway. Here in the city, French immersion is a different thing, right? They're teaching a different French. But
absolutely.
Down the bayou, places where you still have a large percentage of people who do speak French, if they just start speaking to their grandkids, and then you'd have to motivate the grandchildren to speak it in other contexts too, but they would have that base, right? So, and the school is a part of it, and everything in the community it's a community effort involving government and entities like the schools, but especially involving private interactions, right? The schools can't do it alone. I certainly can't do it alone. I'll do what I can to help in producing materials, whatever, but one person can't do it, right? So, and outsiders can't do it. They can support it, but it'll be an inside effort.
Absolutely.
But they can do it. I know they can.
Yes, they can.
There's a lot of there's a lot of willingness to do it, right? So I think
that's the most important thing.
That's true.
Yeah, and then money.
That too. Money also helps, definitely.
Those are the two big things. Okay, well, thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
So we always leave our listeners with our final word, which is, don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
Oh, God.
Such great life advice.
Don't be a linguistic asshole. Okay.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly. All right.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by Chris Ayers for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com.